Our city skylines are full of empty office space. Commercial property vacancy rates have spiked above the peak of the GFC highs. All capitals are feeling the squeeze, with some areas like the Gold Coast approaching 20%. Phil Carey has been looking at the buyer's market for office space.
A quick trip around the country's CBDs and the leasing market for commercial property is not a pretty picture. At nearly 11% nationally, the vacancy rate has bounced above the peak hit after the GFC, with a whopping 1,800,000 square metres of prime space now vacant.
In the case of Sydney, for example, it's the financial sector which has been giving back space. If you look at Perth and Brisbane, the downturn in mining investment is part of the explanation for why space has come back onto the market.
According to Jones Lang LaSalle, Sydney and Melbourne are currently 10% vacancy rates, but Brisbane is more than 14%, and the Gold Coast is knocking on 20%. And ANZ's Paul Braddock believes it'll get worse.
Brisbane at the moment stands out in that respect, where vacancy rates in commercial office are pushing towards 15% and likely to go higher over the next couple of years.
So how much higher are we talking about?
Potentially up towards 18% in aggregate, and the secondary market being far worse than that.
In a further sign of the times, Australia is now on par with other economies hit hard after the GFC, such as America, with vacancy rates comparable to New York, Chicago, Boston and Washington.
There's no doubt that business confidence has been fairly fragile. And as I say, it's not purely an Australian story. We've seen subdued leasing right across most developed countries.
But in markets like Brisbane, with the added mining industry uncertainty and state government job cuts, potential tenants are rare and many landlords desperate.
Landlords will continue to crawl over broken glass for a deal.
Mark Grant of Brisbane's White & Partners says response to potential tenant requests are reaching incredible levels.
Earlier this year, we were putting requirements out for office space and having 30 to 40 responses to those requests for information. We put 2 out last week and got in excess of 150 responses for both requirements.
So tough is the Brisbane market that some landlords have even resorted to gimmicks of cash, trips and even a Porsche giveaway. But the few savvy potential tenants are focused on squeezing huge sign-up incentives and discounts. Leasing incentives not seen for some time, and even a sense of panic by some, are just a couple of the phrases you'll hear when you talk to players in the leasing market. But what's really interesting is the dichotomy between the leasing market and sales. While vacancy rates continue to go up, so too does interest in buying commercial property. In fact, overseas institutional investors look set to break a couple of records they set last year, more than $5 billion in sales and more than 30% of the market.
As a result of the global financial crisis, we've seen investors, and this is some of the big sovereign wealth funds, for example, cutting back on their equity exposure because they worry about volatility.
The risks are clearly growing from a rent and a valuation perspective, and I doubt that the foreign institutional investors are fully aware of how sharp that deterioration in the market has been over recent years.
And while many overseas investors are clearly not deterred, punting on an upswing as the light at the end of the tunnel, the question is that light a much anticipated return to better times or a train?